Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Michael Morton? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing you in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, consider supporting me on Patreon, and check out my podcast. I'll put all the relevant links in the description for this video. First, I'll start with the background in this case. I'll move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Michael Morton was born on August 12, 1954. His father worked for an oil field service company. The family moved from Waco, Texas, to a number of small towns in Southern California before they settled in Kilgore, Texas. Michael graduated from high school in this town. Michael would meet Christine Kirkpatrick in 1976 when they were attending college in Texas. Both of them dropped out of college, planning on transferring to another university, but that other university would not accept their credits. Michael took a job stocking shelves at a Safeway supermarket and eventually moved up to management. People said that the couple's relationship was passionate, they bickered constantly, and they would have intense arguments. They spoke so candidly to one another that it would upset their friends. Sometimes foul language was involved. There were a number of recurring jokes between the two that would involve expletives. The couple married in 1979. Christine had a miscarriage in 1981. The couple was devastated. Christine became pregnant again, and her son Eric was born in 1983. Eric had a congenital heart defect. A surgery was available to correct the defect, but it was too risky to perform until Eric weighed 30 pounds or was 3 years old. For several years, the couple worried about Eric as they waited for the surgery. This put a lot of stress on their marriage. Friends reported that Michael complained that Christine needed to lose weight and they were not having enough sex. The couple bought a house in northwest Austin in 1985. In June 1996, not long before Eric turned 3, the surgery was performed. Eric's health improved tremendously after the surgery. This takes us to August 12, 1986, Michael's 32nd birthday. The family ate dinner at a restaurant in downtown Austin. When they returned home, Eric was put to bed. Michael put on an adult video that he had rented, hoping to create a mood that would lead to sex. Christine fell asleep in the living room. Michael went to bed alone. Later, she came to bed, leaned over him, and kissed him, saying, "Tomorrow night," indicating they would have sex the next night. The next morning, August 13, as Michael was getting ready for work, he was still upset about what happened. He wrote Christine a note, which he left in the bathroom. The note suggested he was disappointed about what happened. He didn't want to get into another fight about sex. He just wanted her to think about how it would have felt if it was her birthday and she was denied sex. He left for work not long after 5:30 a.m. He clocked in at Safeway at 6:05 a.m. After work, he stopped at a shopping mall. This was just after 2 p.m. Sometime around 3:30 p.m., Michael went to pick up Eric. He would usually stay with a babysitter named Mildred Redden. When Michael arrived, Redden told him that she had not heard from Christine all day, and no one dropped Eric off. Michael used Redden's phone to call Christine. The sheriff, Jim Boutwell, answered the phone at Michael's home. He told Michael that he needed to talk to him. Michael told Boutwell he would be there in about 10 minutes. Jim Boutwell was a well-known figure. At this time, he was suspected of perpetrating a hoax with a serial killer named Henry Lee Lucas. He gave Lucas information about murders so that Lucas could falsely confess to them. Lucas would confess to more than 600 homicides he did not commit. I have a separate video about Henry Lee Lucas. At this point, news of the hoax was getting out in the open, but Boutwell was still an exceedingly popular sheriff. Boutwell informed Michael that his son was alive, but his wife was dead. The police claimed that Michael did not react to the news of Christine's death. Christine had been murdered sometime that morning. Her body was found by a neighbor after the neighbor saw Eric wandering around the front yard. Christine's body was lying on the waterbed in the couple's bedroom with the comforter pulled over her face. Her head had sustained blunt force trauma, and blood was all over the room. A blue suitcase and a wicker basket had been stacked on her body. There was no forced entry into the house. As it turns out, the sliding glass door had been left unlocked. Christine's purse was missing, along with a .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol, but her wedding band and engagement ring were on the nightstand in plain sight. Other valuable items were also left in the residence, like a camera. There was a fresh footprint in the backyard. 15 fingerprints were found at the house, one from that blue suitcase, but none of them were identified. Boutwell assumed that Michael was the perpetrator after reading the note that Michael had left about not getting sex. Michael's lack of emotion only reinforced Boutwell's belief. Michael talked to the police without an attorney. He denied having anything to do with Christine's homicide. Later that day, the police allowed Michael to reunite with his son Eric. Michael and his son stayed in the house where his wife had been murdered. It surprised people that Michael would do that. The next day, August 14, the police were in the neighborhood talking to people. They were not asking too many questions, rather just trying to reassure people that the murder was not random. They kind of suggested they knew who did it. Many people thought that the police suspected Michael. 2 different neighbors would tell the police that they had seen a man driving a green van park in a wooded, vacant lot behind the Morton home. This happened several times. One neighbor even saw the man walk up to the Morton's fence. Early in the morning on the day Christine was murdered, the man in the van was parked in that vacant lot. Also on August 14, Christine's brother, John Kirkpatrick, searched around the Morton residence. He found a blue bandana stained with blood in the area where the van had been parked. It was just 100 yards away from the residence. He turned it over to the police. On August 15, a store in San Antonio, Texas, reported to the police that someone had fraudulently used Christine Morton's credit card. An autopsy revealed that Christine was not sexually assaulted, and she died sometime between 1 a.m. and 6 a.m. on August 13. By this point, Boutwell was positive Michael was guilty. He turned Christine's parents against Michael by suggesting that Michael was the killer in a not-so-subtle manner. The investigation produced no physical evidence connecting Michael to the murder, but the sheriff continued to believe Michael was guilty. One mystery in this case initially was surrounding what Eric had witnessed. The police had questioned him, but he didn't say anything. Later, when Michael was scrubbing the bathtub, Eric walked up behind him and said, "Do you know who the man was in the shower with his clothes on?" An apparent reference to whoever killed Christine. Michael didn't tell the police about Eric's statement because he did not want the police near his son. Michael hired attorneys who advised him to stop communicating with the police. Christine's mother-in-law told the police that Eric told her that he saw the attack on his mother. He described a monster wearing red gloves with a big mustache. The man was not his father. The medical examiner changed his theory about the time of death. He had said Christine died between 1 a.m. and 6 a.m. Now he was saying that Christine could not have died after 1:30 a.m. The change was based on the idea that the medical examiner believed Christine had eaten dinner at 11 p.m., but then he found out that Michael paid for the meal at 9:21 p.m. Using the status of partially digested food in Christine's stomach to determine the time of death, which is not an accurate method, the medical examiner revised the timeline by 4.5 hours. It's not clear how an hour and 40-minute time difference for eating dinner resulted in a 4.5-hour difference in the time of death. Perhaps math wasn't his strong suit. Later, this medical examiner's work in other cases would be reviewed by none other than the well-known forensic pathologist Michael Baden, who was heavily critical of the medical examiner. Michael Morton was arrested on September 25, 1986, and charged with murder. 2 days after his arrest, the police received a canceled check for $20 that Christine had been given prior to the murder. The check had been in her purse, which of course was stolen. Someone had cashed it after the murder using a forged signature. Michael was released on bail in early October. The trial started on February 10, 1987. Here is the prosecution's theory of the crime. Christine denied Michael sex, and he went into a rage. He took a blunt object, which may have been a billy club, and beat his wife to death. He tried to make it look like a burglary by pulling out 4 dresser drawers and emptying them. He wrote a note to make it seem as though Christine was still alive when he left for work. He took her purse, the .45 caliber pistol, and the murder weapon and dumped them somewhere before going to his job. The prosecution tried to support their theory with the following evidence. Michael was the only one capable of murder who was with Christine from 9:30 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. on August 12 and 13. Interestingly, the medical examiner testified that this estimate was not based on science. The prosecutor used the term medical science 7 times in the closing argument, specifically referring to the medical examiner's testimony. Michael didn't show emotions when he heard of Christine's death. He made unkind remarks about his wife in the past and referred to her using expletives. 2 days after the funeral, Michael used a lawn trimmer to cut down marigolds at the end of his driveway. Christine had planted these over his objection. He repainted the bedroom and started sleeping in the waterbed where Christine's body was found. The prosecution played part of the adult video Michael had rented. The jury was repulsed. One juror thought to himself, what kind of person would watch this? The prosecution argued that fluid found on Christine was Michael's semen. They claimed that this meant he must have masturbated over her body after killing her. Now looking at the argument for the defense, no physical evidence tied Michael to the crime. No murder weapon was found. He had no criminal history, no history of violence. The motive suggested by the state was weak. Michael had no injuries indicating he was in a struggle. Why would he kill his wife and leave his son alone? Where was the missing firearm? And who left the footprint and the fingerprints? The prosecution had not turned over all the notes from the police. The defense did not know about a lot of the exculpatory evidence, including the man in the van and the bloody bandana. On February 17, 1987, Michael Morton was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Michael suffered in prison. His son was taken to visit him until he was 13, when Eric no longer wanted to visit his father. Michael earned a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in literature while in prison. He was offered parole in 2010 under the condition that he expressed remorse. Michael maintained his innocence. Over the course of several years after his conviction, the case against Michael started to unravel. Advances in DNA testing on the fluid found on Christine's body showed that Michael and Christine had sex days or weeks before the murder. He did not masturbate on her body after the murder. The defense learned about the bandana and other evidence. DNA testing on the blood found on the bandana revealed Christine's DNA and DNA of an unknown man. Michael's DNA was not found. The unknown DNA was eventually matched to a man named Mark Allen Norwood, an individual with an extensive criminal history, including arson, breaking and entering, resisting arrest, and aggravated assault with intent to kill. Mugshots of Norwood revealed he had a large mustache. Norwood's DNA was found at the scene of another similar homicide that occurred in 1988. The victim was a woman named Deborah Masters Baker. Michael Morton was released on October 3, 2011. He was exonerated. He would receive just under $2 million for wrongful imprisonment. Over some time, he was able to reconnect with his son Eric. The actual killer, Norwood, was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison in 2013. In 2016, Norwood was convicted of murdering Deborah Masters Baker. The man who prosecuted Michael Morton, Ken Anderson, was charged with contempt of court and evidence tampering. Under a plea bargain, he was found guilty of the contempt of court. The other charge was dropped. He was sentenced to just 10 days in jail, 500 hours of community service, and a $500 fine. He was given credit for 1 day spent in jail after being arrested. Ken Anderson would only spend 5 of the 9 remaining days in jail. This was due to good behavior. I guess he managed not to falsely accuse anyone else when he was in jail. Now moving to my analysis. This case illustrates how dependent the criminal justice system is on honesty from the police and prosecutors, and how easily people trust the police and prosecutors. Both Boutwell and Anderson escaped any real consequences. Boutwell died of cancer. He was never charged. I doubt he would have been charged if he had survived. Anderson was convicted and served 6 days in jail total. Due to their irrational and indefensible behavior, not only did Michael Morton go to prison, another victim was murdered by the actual perpetrator. It's possible the police could have stopped Norwood if they had ever suspected for a moment that he existed. The false conviction of Michael Morton occurred not only because of corrupt law enforcement, but due to a jury that was easily manipulated. The jury fell for the unlikely motive of being upset about not having sex. When Michael Morton cried in the courtroom, they assumed he was crying tears of guilt. When he testified on the stand, he tried to stay strong, not to show too much emotion. This also worked against him. They assumed he was a callous monster. I find this interesting. When he's crying, he's guilty. When he's not crying, he's guilty. What behavior would be consistent with not guilty? I guess when the jury was given instructions on what to do, they were never told about the not guilty possibility. The judges were like, okay, you can find the defendant guilty and then the jury cuts him off. All right, that's enough talking. We got it. That's all we need. It wasn't only law enforcement and the jury. Many people in the community were eager to believe the narrative of the police, in part because it provided a sense of safety. It gave them certainty. They didn't want to believe there was a killer on the loose. They wanted peace of mind. In reality, the community was in danger from two sources, Norwood and the police. Norwood because he killed people, and the police because they were content to charge an innocent person. This case illustrates how easy it is to be falsely convicted, how almost anything a person does can be distorted into a malicious narrative. An imperfect relationship, complaining about a partner, an unsatisfactory sex life, a note to that effect, a lack of emotion, ostensibly having the wrong emotion or the wrong reaction. The negative theme is easier to believe when there isn't a lot of evidence of an alternate theory of the crime. In this case, that evidence was available, but it wasn't shared with the defense. The other incredible part of this case is the resilience of Michael Morton, a man who was 100% innocent and suffered for over 24 years in prison. He lost everything: his wife, contact with his son, his freedom. People hated him. They wouldn't talk to him. He was isolated. People wanted him to confess to something he did not do. I think it's a reminder that prison is a devastating punishment. Prisoners who maintain their innocence should always have their claims seriously considered. They're in a position where it's very hard to undo what's been done to them. And if they've been falsely convicted, it's really a difficult road to travel to get that reversed. Those are my thoughts on the case of Michael Morton. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.